Oh, Harvey. Are we streaming yet? Okay, we're live. Let's go tell the world. Wait, first let's check our mic sound. Test. Our mic seems fine. Let's go tell the world that we're streaming then. Streaming indie dev, doing various underwater stuff. Shaders and meshes and crap. Paste. Oh, that's not the right link. That's the right link. And then over here, paste it again. I just went for a little bit of a jog, so I am just a touch winded. That's how it goes. If you're not winded after a jog, then guess what? You didn't jog enough. All right, so yes, because I am definitely the pinnacle of physical fitness and the person you should listen to for advice on physical fitness. So there's a lot of things we want to do today. I played a game, parts of a game that just came out. It's called Blue Depths or something like that. I can look it up if anybody cares. Just came out on the 11th. And it's kind of the opposite of my game in many ways, but we're both doing sci-fi underwater games. And I noticed a few things that I want to do that they didn't do and I don't currently do. But we're going to do some warm-ups first. We're going to do some quick little things. One of the things is this here. I just kind of threw it together nice and fast because I wanted to make sure that the way that it looks was the right shape. I don't know for sure that it's the right shape yet, but I do know that we can polish what we've got pretty easily. So let's go ahead and do that. So here it is in Blender. So there are two things that we need to polish. Well, there's only one thing, damage, but we need to polish the damage pretty significantly. We're going to be using a combination of additional mesh elements and vertex paints to try and get this damage to really sort of work for us. Now if we grab this edge here, we can just hit G twice and drag it out. That'll get us a nice thin-skinned membrane like that, see? The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a loop cut around this entire edge. But there's not really a super easy way to do that since there's not really a loop around the edge. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to select all these faces here. And then we're going to subdivide them, which should be under faces. Is it under edge? It's subdivide, there it is. Boom. Oh, and you can see it didn't work in the slightest. Now that's because a lot of these faces are n-gons, and n-gons don't properly subdivide with the default subdivide setup. So the first thing we got to do is change them into triangles. Pow! And then we got to subdivide them. There we are. Boom. So you can see that what we've got now is much denser than what we had before, and the reason we want that... Oh, hold on, undo. The reason we want that extra density, there we go, is because we are going to be... Hold on, do I have to undo again? No, I think those are all quads. Let's find out. Give me a second to do this before I explain it. Yeah, it's fine. So the reason we need to do this is because we're going to be painting these with colors so that we can use a splat technique on them. And, you know, it's hard to do that when you don't have enough verts to really manifest the colors you need. Now, with that said, we're going to just do a little bit of tweaking here and there to try and minimize the amount of silliness that we've got to deal with before we, you know, get into things properly. And we can also adjust things like create proper cuts that feel, you know, jagged and stuff like that. So we could just sit here and do this all day because there's nothing more fun to me than screwing around with destructed edges like this. But there are some other options that we've got, and we're going to go ahead and start to work with them. We need to add in some more meshes so that the interior elements don't look like this, because that's not too bad if it's black and you can't see inside, but I'd prefer to have a semblance of something that feels like it exists. So we're going to add in a cylinder like that. And as you can see, the cylinder is exactly where you want it to be in the right size. There we are. So when we scale up the cylinder, we can quickly get an impression of having something in the inside of this area. And of course, we're not going to keep the whole thing. We're going to only keep the part that we need, and we're not going to let it interfere with the overall shapes that we're going for. Here we are. And we'll just scale that down. And you can see we've got some extra crap off to the side, so we're just going to get rid of that. Actually, let's go ahead and do this, because that'll grab the top and the bottom. See? The tops and the bottoms are things we don't need, so we're going to get rid of that. And of course, we've got the same problem over here. And that should be fine, but we do have a whole bunch in the back. They're not technically going to be in our way, but they're not something we need. So there we go. And now we've got that inner surface. And what we want to do is we want to set this inner surface up to be a different material. Not glowy and not metal and not black. So we're going to go ahead and choose plastic for that, just so that it doesn't show up as the same thing as everything else that we've got going. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a plane, which we will simply move into place. That. And in order to get the effect we want out of this plane, we're going to go ahead and just make it a little bit larger. And you can see that it's not quite the right shape, so we are going to cut it in half if we can find the perfect spot. Oh, there we are. There. And then that one will come forward, and then the whole shebang will get moved back. There we are. And what we're going to do is punch that out. And the reason we're going to punch it out is because we are going to need to do a solidify or a skin modifier. I think a skin would be better. So if we select all of the points and then shrink them down, that didn't work. We can't see the points. We're going to go ahead and hide this for a second so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so now they're all selected. There we are. Don't know what I was doing wrong, but it was something. So you can see what we can do is we can create this sort of appearance. But there's a lot more that we can do with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a Subsurface Modifier. And we should be able to get a Subsurface Modifier that happens up here. And instead of using Catmull-Clark, we'll use Simple. And we'll simply increase the density like that. See? So now the only thing left for us to do is to tweak the overall mesh so that it fits inside of the frame a little bit better. And that's going to be largely a matter of doing this. We need to... Can I see it without... Nope, that's not what I want. There we are. We need to grab these 2 points in the middle. There we are. So the only issue I've got is that it's not stopped at the midpoint, but what we'll do is we'll actually fix that when we finish it up, because I want to dent it and damage it. So we'll go ahead and shabam, look at that. We've got a whole bunch of crap going on here. The Relin says, what are you going for here? I'm just going for damage to the surface, and we're just showing some stuff under the surface, with the idea being that it's sort of a generic structural piece. Now we can do this, but you can see how it gets all junky. So the better option for us is to actually undo what we just did and not put the skin in yet. As long as we've got the subsurface modifier and not the skin, we can actually dent the pieces without denting the entire frame. See? So that will allow us to do some damage as we want. We'll just grab some of the points and move them forward or back as we see fit. And it's a little bit janky, so we'll just lower the width a little bit. I can't see the width marker. Why can't I see the width marker? Blender has decided not to render the width marker anymore. All right, fine. If you know why Blender doesn't want to show me the width marker, let me know. I'd like that to not be a thing, but until then, we'll just work with what we've got. Yeah, that's not catastrophic. We just go in here and soften them up a little bit more. Hello, select everything. There we are. It's A. So now, if we apply that, we should be able to just punch it straight in. No. There we go. And now we've got this object in here. And you can see that it's going to be the sort of thing where it's inside of the skin of the mesh. And it's obviously a little bit, a little extra. Like that's not really any reason for the stuff that's down here or whatever. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to paint a ring around these so that we can get a different shader for the chipped metal portion that we're trying to create. So to do that, we're going to switch over into paint mode. But you know what? Before we do that, we're going to grab the interior surfaces that we just created. We're going to punch them right back out. We could also try and hide them, but Blender's never been terribly good about listening to what you've told it to hide. So it's easier for us to punch them out. And we'll put them back together when we're done. So now that it's just this, we shouldn't have any problem with the paint mode. There we go. And we'll just use black for the edges. And basically the edges are going to be a different category of metal. And that's all there is to it. So we'll just... Is X-axis symmetry turned on? I don't want it to be in this case. No, good. Why isn't it painting? Okay, it is painting. I don't know why Blender even lets you be in this render mode if it's not going to actually work in the mode you're in. Why would they do that? That makes no sense. Well, whatever. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to create some depth to certain parts of it so that it feels a little bit more organic, a little bit less forced. And that should be pretty much fine. Let's go ahead and put it all back together. And put it over in Unity and see what it looks like. Oh, that's not Unity. There's Unity. All right, so the first thing you'll notice is that it doesn't really look very different. That's because we didn't really do very much work on the mesh part that you can see. We'll go ahead and put in metal, world metal flat, which of course it no longer selects because that would be too easy. Once we manually search up world metal flat, we'll put that in, and you can sort of see that part. This world metal flat that we're using for the exterior elements needs to be changed. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the world chord shader that we're using. Just double check that we are using the world chord shader. Yep. Going to duplicate it, and we're going to create a world chord splat shader. And maybe we won't need the original one anymore. We'll have to think about it. Here we go. Oh, that didn't work. There's like a half-second delay on the typing. I don't know why, but it makes it a little hard to type. So now what we've got is we do in fact have some vertex color setups here, and it's worth just taking a look because I didn't label any of this for some reason. Here's where the world position stuff happens. This is where we draw the scratches, right? So there's nothing special about that right now. We don't need to worry about that at the moment. But over here we do have a reference to vertex color R. And I didn't think we had anything in here that was vertex color R. So if we take a look at what that is controlling, it is in fact creating the lerp between the filth and the surface. Oh, we haven't actually, sorry, let's go ahead and just create the material. We'll just duplicate world metal flat and change it over to the new shader. But that doesn't make any sense because I haven't changed anything. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out. Oh, I don't have a texture attached to it. That's why. Let's go ahead and try it though. So we're gonna go ahead and name this world metal damaged, and we're gonna put in some textures and see whether we can get it to work because it might already be set up to do what I need it to do. In which case, we'll just delete that thing in a second here. Yeah, it is. So we can choose a nothing for the main mask, and then if we go down here into the filth mask, we should be able to choose something that's like shinier or rustier. Here's the issue. It actually needs to be, if it was damaged recently, it needs to be hecka shiny. And so maybe what I need to do is reverse them. We'll have to think about it. For now, we'll just put on something like this just for a temporary sort of setup. And you can see that what we end up with is not very crisp. It's very faint. See that? What we actually need to do here is create an exponent value that will allow us to create a real crisp edge. So I think we are going to... I think we're going to edit the original shader. We're going to delete this shader because I don't need it. I'm already doing the work that I thought I would need to implement. So goodbye. And then we will simply take that world metal damaged and point it back to the original. And we'll open up the shader editor. Here we are. And then over here, this is the lerp that we're using. See this remap, clamp, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to go ahead and put together a power value. Like this. And we're going to have it default to 1, but it can be anything we want. So we're going to go ahead and select this with my mouse. What? For some reason, oh, you know what it is? I've turned on all of the terrains because I was testing something. And I think Unity has decided that nothing else should get any chances to actually function because for some reason it's decided to render everything that nobody can see. That's my guess anyway. So down here we've got this float, which is going to be a property, which we're going to call edge exponent. And we'll just drop that in. And it still says it hasn't saved yet, so we'll save it again. Now that we've got that set up, we should be able to increase the world's edge element here. There it is. That's not doing shit. I don't see any difference at all. Do you? Maybe it... No? I don't see anything happening here at all. It looks like it's... This is not the right material. Oh, I'm an idiot. So the problem here is that I'm an idiot. I've got two very nearly identical materials, and that's what's happening. So let's put this one back the way it was, because otherwise it'll look weird. That's more like it. So you can see that that gives us a much sharper crease. Obviously, this is a little bit wrong, but we should be able to change. That's a scratch limit. That's the opposite of what I want to touch. It's the filth limit. There it is. So if we reduce the filth limit, you see how we can make it very, very specific to a given region. But the problem is this isn't how we want the filth to look. I'm not sure what this must only affect the main texture, which is kind of a shame. Yeah. If we reduce the scaling here, we can get sharper edges that feel a little bit more natural. But what we really need is the exact opposite of this. We need this to be shiny and this to be not so shiny. And to do that, we may need to do some editing because it's, well, we could just change things around a little bit. For example, if we were to make it painted a certain color, we could show the paint wearing off, right? Here's some flat pink. It's not really a flat pink, it's a flat peach. But I don't think peach is the color we want to go. It's too similar to the background. I'm just kind of choosing things at random. What I really should do is just make it a color. Let's go ahead and try that first. So if we change this tint color to, say, blue, you can see the issue here is that it also tints the filth. So the first thing we need to do is probably take away the filth tint. Here it is. See this color? Surface color, multiply. It's actually not that difficult. We just move it from here to here. There we go. And then save that. So now the filth won't be painted. And if we just change this over into another empty, you can see what we've got is a sort of setup. It's not too bad, but it's kind of bad. It's not exactly what I had in mind. One of the problems is that it feels very cartoony. Don't know if it's going to work out. I'll have to think about it. Let's see what it looks like in the game world proper. I may have simply painted too much or too evenly. So we can go back in and tweak the paint job after looking at it. Yeah, it's clearly not very realistic. It doesn't look right. And I think the reason for that is because I was really bold with the painting. So we're going to go back in here and once again punch these out. Did I do that right? Let's try that again. No, don't make anybody the parent of anything. There we are. So now that we've done that, we can go over into paint mode. Boom. And you can see that I've got this very dark setup. We're going to go ahead and pull back on some of these values. And we're going to use a gray color coming on down like this, because I think that that will allow us to get kind of a spotty damage, which will feel probably a little bit better. We'll find out, I guess. Because I don't want this to be quite so bold. I want it to be a little bit less aggressive. So we're just going to bring these values down towards 0.5 rather than 0. But up here at the top, I'd like to actually do some mesh adjusting. If we select this entire top row, I can just, there we are. No! There we are. I can just double G and then drag it down. That'll give us a much tighter setup, but you can see that we've got a lot of gray going up here. That's not what I want. So we're going to use a bold white and get rid of most of that gray, just because I don't want it. Hopefully this will add some directionality to the damage that we created, so that it won't appear to be quite so forced in like a ring, because a ring is not really what I want. All right, so we're going to save that. Oh, just a little bit more here. There, save that. And then I go back over into Unity and take a look. There we are. So the idea here is I'd like to have this feel very natural. And if we take a look at the damaged metal that we're using here, we've got a scratch limit, and we can change. That's a scratch limit. That's not what I'm looking for. Sorry, because we're technically creating a scratch, but I'm using something called a filth system. So the filth system is not a scratch, even though it's technically a scratch. So if we move the filth scaling way, way down, oh, that's negative, like this, for example, we should be able to get a fairly bold set of scratches out of it. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for. I think this is probably about as good as we're going to get, but the problem is that it doesn't look like metal. It looks like plastic. If we were to change the metallicity a little bit, we can make it look a little bit more like metal. Let's go ahead and take a look. Now the problem with the metallicity, it's the same problem that I got with the smoothness actually. It's trying to show the reflections of a sky map. There shouldn't be any reflections of any sky map. I've turned them off, but it still tries to show them anyway. So you get a strange glow on the outside of your character, like you can see on the top of my butt. That glow is from the sky map. And, you know, there's no skybox. Why is it showing a skybox? I don't know. Okay, so there you can see it's very, very metallic. What we really need to do is allow the metallic values to vary based on whether they are blue or not. You know, which of the values they are. This isn't necessarily wrong. I'm going to keep it for a little while, think about it. If I were to change it so that you could do smoothness and metallicity per element, it might make more sense for me to have a different shader that's a little bit better set up, because this is really pretty basic. I kind of just threw it together out of desperation. So the basic idea here should be okay. The other thing I wanted to do is work on my fog effects, because I played a game recently, which, I'm just taking a look at how it looks from over here. That's not bad. I played a game recently, the newest diving game, and it has a lot of very pretty things about it, but it also has some very not pretty things about it. And one of the things it does wrong is it feels very small. And it feels like it is set inside of an aquarium. And that's largely because the physicality of the terrain doesn't exist. And what I mean by that is if you look at the terrain, the fog is exactly the same high and low. But in reality, what happens is as you go down, in a situation like this anyway, as you go down, it gets denser. The particulate matter tends to gather on the surfaces, especially in things like corners and stuff. So it doesn't make any sense for it to just be a generic depth map. Now I'm sort of using a generic depth map. I'm going to turn on room 3, turn off room 3, turn on room 2 rather. I'm sort of using a generic depth map right now, but what I want to do is experiment with replacing it with a depth-aware fog. You can see how I've got depth from camera. What I'd also like is depth from surface. So that's the next thing we're going to work on here. And the effect that we're looking at there is actually a shader post effect. It's a transparent quad on top of the camera. So if we look at the camera, which is down here somewhere, it's actually named something simple, but I don't remember what it was called, like effect quad or fog quad or something. Fog quad. So if we take a look, this is the fog quad, and it's called the Chem quad shader. If we open that up in the shader editor, this is what we've got. It's not very complicated. Here's our depth fade. And then we take that depth fade, we clamp it based on the distances that we're using. And what we're going with here is the idea that there is a desaturation section and then there is a fog section. This isn't exactly correct, so we may just want to completely redo this because in actuality what you get is sort of a linear fog and an exponential desaturation, which we'll have to work with later on. But here you can see what's going on is one of these values is being used for the opacity, which is just a flat blue filter, and the other of which is being used for emission. But what we're emitting is whatever we see behind ourselves. See that? So yeah, here it is. Grab screen color, RGB to HSV, and then we take that color and we lerp between that color and the hue and saturation that we want to use. And it seems to work for the most part, but it doesn't take into account the Y value. It's only using depth from camera, see? So in order to get the Y value, we should be able to reconstruct it. Here's reconstruct world position from depth. And this is theoretically enough to get us a Z value. So what we're going to do to test this is, it's not a Z, it's a Y. What we're going to do to test this is to use some other method rather than this. So we're going to pull this back a little bit, and we're going to, instead of remapping there, we're just going to use the Y value. Now here's the thing, this Y value is actually going to need to be remapped because it is ridiculously large values. So, boom. And basically the Y value that we are using is going to be between 80 and 100, and we want it to be between 0 and 1. That's basically it. So what this should do is it should paint the skies. Yeah, see? So what it's done is it's made the sky completely opaque, which is exactly the opposite of what we want, but it's super easy to invert something that is an opposite. So if we take this and we simply invert it, now we will have a ground-based setup. But the thing is that we don't actually want it to be this perfect. We're going to want to add in a lot of... so this is a desaturation fog that we're using. We really need to recreate this with a lot of like custom values. We're going to add in some noise is what I'm getting at. We don't want everything to be this perfect. It doesn't feel quite right. But as you can see, it's already looking pretty interesting, and that's definitely the right approach. This is simply called a depth fog. You can see that we've got some weirdness going on as we move away from the camera straight ahead. It's actually not weirdness. It's only weird because I set up the rest of the renderer pipeline in a way that assumes there would be fog. And there will be fog, but we have to put it back in first. So we're going to go ahead and put in that random value that we want. So we're going to want to start to set up some of these values that we're going to need to track. Max our top of fog. We're going to go ahead and set that up at 100 because that is the literal surface. It's at 100 Y for reasons that we won't go into right now. And I believe that that's there. No, it's there. And then we're going to want to duplicate that and call this bottom of fog. 80 is the default swim depth in this particular scene. And then we do min and max new. That's correct there. But we want to change these values based on a noise. So what we're going to do is we're going to add to the bottom based on a noise value. So if we just use some good old-fashioned Perlin noise, I guess we just call it noise in here. There it is. So basically we want to use the world coordinates for this, and we're going to want this world coordinate. There we go, see it? We're going to want to allow the scale to be dictated. Fog perturb scale. And we'll go ahead and just set that to 1 for now. We'll change it later as we need it. And then we just want to add these things together. So, stupa, stupa, stupa. Oh, yeah, and we need to actually scale the noise because this is from 0 to 1. So we just need another one of these guys, which we will call Fog Perturb Amplitude. And this will be the number of meters. So, you know, that will create some noisy fog. Let's take a look. Keeping in mind that this is still very, very early. We're not getting anywhere close to what we will really want to do here. But what we're seeing now is fog that has been boosted. Now it makes the ocean glow in the deep, which we'll talk about later. We'll fix it later. But I just want to get the basic fog effects right. So for now, let's assume that we're flying above a giant alien rift or something. So if we see what we've got here, when we start to adjust these values, we're going to be able to see exactly what the differences are in how these values work. For example, it probably makes a lot more sense for us to make this more like 75 and then have the fog perturb scale was 0 for some reason. But you can see that as I increase it, it gets really, really choppy and obvious. That's because the scale here is quite large. We really want the fog perturb scale to be something like 0.1, something quite small. And if we amp up the amplitude to maybe 10, then we can really start to see how effective this fog is. You can see how it's got like some spots that are noticeably not just linear, and that's the key here. We don't want to have a super linear predictable fog because it doesn't feel realistic. Nothing about glowing fog feels realistic in the first place, but we're about to fix that. So let's go ahead. I don't think 0.2 or 0.1 is very good. Let's try 0.097 for reasons that are otherwise it will loop a little bit on the meter. We don't want that. Ob stopped in to say, "What's up, Perkinator?" We're making fog effects that are a little bit better than they were before. So what we're going to do is we're going to, is it set? Register. We're going to go ahead and register this local variable here. And what this variable is going to be called is depth fog. And it's obviously not going to go straight into opacity. So we're just going to grab that, move it down, add a comment, depth fog. And then we're also going to want to add in the camera depth as well. So this is not actually depth fog because they're both depth fog. This is y-axis fog. And then we also have a camera depth fog, which is up here. So when we get this camera depth fog, we're actually using two different routes. So I just want to know whether or not this camera depth fade runs twice if I have two nodes. I don't think it does. I guess if it does, we can clean it up later. But basically, we want to have a camera depth fog as well. And these two fogs combined will probably max them. So if we take a look at the camera depth fade, this goes between like it's taking a vertex position. Okay, I see what's going on. This is a very specific function. But it takes this distance, and I don't know what that distance is. What's that distance? It should be giving me a distance. Would you let me click on the online fucking reference? Jesus. The gradient range or fading distance can be set by adjusting the distance. This parameter does its graded value in a 0 to 1 range where the distance between the surface of an object and the geometry behind it is within the value specified. Okay, so basically, if I set that to 2, it'll be a value between 0 and 2, rather than 0 and 1, I suppose. Because the depth buffer is a value between 0 and 1, I guess. No, this is distance in world space coordinates to which the fade should take place. Distance in world space. I mean, according to this, it should be like a number in meters. Don't really know. That doesn't seem right, because it was giving me fine values before. Oh, of course, because I see what's going on. It's just giving me the literal distance in meters, because I'm telling it to do it in meters. So if I were to give it a value between 0 and 10, if I were to give it a distance of 10, then I would get tenths of meters. Okay, so that makes sense. Now, with that in mind, this clamp value is, depth. We're going to go ahead and create some new values here. Eventually, we're going to just completely get rid of the old one, but not until we've got some labels running. So we're going to call this fade distance min. I'll go ahead and give that whatever value we want. It looks like we're defaulting to 2 right now. And then we're going to have a fade distance max. We don't need to clamp here. That's not where that is an old technique. That is not a very good one. There. And that's going to be, I think, a 40 or so. We'll be able to tweak it as much as we want. Then we can clamp. No, that's not right. Then we can clamp it between 0 and 1 instead of doing double clamps and remaps. That makes no sense. So now we have a value between 0 and 1 on the depth fade. And I think that we'll just leave that as a linear fade for now, but we may want to add in an exponent later. Let's go ahead and add in an exponent now. Do we want to add an exponent now? I have a feeling I want to add an exponent, so we're going to go ahead and add one. And then we're going to register that value. And that's going to be camera fade. So when we want to actually get the opacity here, we're going to go ahead and delete this. We don't need that or that. Well, I don't know. Whatever, we'll deal with that for now. We'll have to change that in a minute here. When we want to get the opacity of this value, what we actually want to do is get the maximum of those two, I believe. So we'll just do that. We could also add them together. There's a couple of other things we could do. We might fuss with it a little bit, try and figure out what we want. Let's see whether or not this worked. And then we'll adjust the remaining values. So now we should have both a depth and a depth from the camera and depth from the ground. Yeah, so you can see it's like super murky now because our values are not properly adjusted. But we also have another problem here, and that is we don't actually want to use the same color for both of those fogs. What we would like to do is have a different color for the depth fog and the y-axis fog versus the camera fog, because the camera fog is supposed to be sky colored and the depth fog is supposed to be black or very, very dark blue. So let's get that going too. What we want to do in order to get the color of the fog is up here when we're doing this stuff, we're going to want to mix in 2 different fog colors. And right now we've got a hue and a saturation and a value for one of those colors. What we're probably going to want to do is switch this out for a different approach using standard color values. That'll be a little bit easier for us in the long run. So we'll just go ahead, and that's not it. C is not what I think it is. Every time I hit C, I'm intending it to be something else, and it never is. There we are. So we're going to go ahead and call this camera fog, and we're going to just go ahead and make that just a default blue color for now. And once again, we do need to switch it over to HSV. And the reason I was making it HSV by default to begin with is just to skip this step, but I don't think it's an expensive step, and I really don't want to have to try and memorize every possible set of hues and stuff. That just seems a little bit more challenging than I might like. And so this is going to be y-axis fog. But we only need to do RGB to HSV once because we already know the values of these fogs. And what we're going to do is we're simply going to lerp between these. And the lerp is going to be between the camera fog and the y-axis fog according to the y-axis fog value. So basically the y-axis fog always wins in these fights because it's the one that's supposed to be darker. Once we've managed to sweep this out, what we've got now is a setup where it's a little bit confused and complicated here. But basically, this is our desaturation section. So let's go ahead and move these off to the side for a minute. So there are a couple of steps here. You can see that what we're doing is we're taking the value of the color behind us. So here's our screen color. We're taking the value of our screen color. That means the brightness. And then we are substituting in the hue and the saturation of our fog. And then we're putting that over with a specific opacity. So basically all we really need to do is, we don't even need a depth fade for this. I don't know why I made it with a depth fade. All we really need to do is completely replace it. So that's what we're going to do. So we're just going to delete all of this crap. And then value, saturation, hue. I don't know why they're in different orders. That's very strange. I guess they're not. They're only in different orders because I'm an idiot. Nah. There. There we go. Much cleaner, don't you think? That is like super clean compared to how it was. Let's see if it sucks. Unfortunately, our fog recolor is now going to not work anymore. We're going to have to fix that. We definitely have some bugs. We'll have to do some processing to see what the heck's up with this. Like seizure warning. What the fuck is going on? That's a shadow. Well, I don't know what I expected, but this was not it. This is positively psychedelic. So we forgot to bound some values, and that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing unbounded values. But let's go ahead and take a screenshot of these pretty unbounded values and post that up. The Relin says it's a feature. Yeah, it's a feature if I do it on purpose. It's a bug if I do it on accident. Oops. Forgot to clamp the fog lerp. No, I only need one image. Then we'll call that Screenshot Saturday, because why not? Maybe we'll use an effect like this for brine pools. He says, the Relin says that it's a classic Bob Ross situation. Well, maybe, but I don't plan to paint trees over it. It really is very psychedelic. The sparking is what really confuses me. There shouldn't be any sparking. Now, I know what the sparking is, but I don't know why it's happening. Because there shouldn't be any recalculations. I'm not moving at all, neither is the ground. My guess is that what's happening is that the light, that's what's happening. The light, maybe. No, it can't be. I don't know. Well, either way, let's just bind it. So, this isn't the issue. It should be fine. Unless this is the problem, but these are both clamped 0-1. I'm trying to figure out what the problem could be. Oh, we're not clamped here. Okay, that's no big deal. Let's clamp it. Why didn't we see this problem? Oh, because we weren't doing the fog recolor. That's what the issue is. All right. That's not a clamp. That's a comment. There we are. Now it should work. Yeah, no more weird glowing. However, this doesn't look right, does it? It really doesn't. It's desaturated the entire screen. But it hasn't created any fog. Oh, you know what the issue here is? The desaturation is now the default color. So if I were to radically change these values, you'd notice a difference. But I'm taking the value from the camera, and I need to be adjusting the value to match the fog value at range. I guess we can just use this value here. So we'll go ahead and use a register. Call it total fog. And then over here, we'll lerp between this value and this value based on the total fog. Hold on a minute. Someone pulled up outside my window again. My next door neighbor is getting ready to tear down his house, and he parks his truck directly in front of my window and loads into it for hours on end. Parked a dumpster directly in front of my air conditioner. Such a lovely person. Yeah, this is actually backwards. That's fine. And so we're going to get local variable total fog. There we are. Well, now the error is back, but that's fine. So what we've got now is a situation where the depth fog is... obviously the fog in general is just not working quite right. But it is more close than you would think. It is an error that we can work with. We'll just tweak these values a little bit and see whether or not there's something we don't understand. That's top water. That is absolutely not the camera. So if we drop the bottom of fog, you can see that we can just adjust it however we want. What we really would like to do is maybe bring this down to 85. And then we can take this and brighten it just a little bit. It's a little too dark for what we need right now. And then for the camera fade distance max and that sort of thing, it's obviously a little too aggressive. We can push this back to maybe 20 and this back to maybe 80. Even that's a little bit low. But the problem here is that it is really clearly linear, and I'm not sure how much I like that. Maybe what we need to do is have a multiplier for each of these. Ooh, that rope no longer looks right at all. We'll deal with that later. Maybe what we need to do is have a multiplier for the depth fog or something, because it's... Hold on. I reached over and closed my window and bumped my mic, and it's nowhere near being in the right spot anymore. So if we were to... I'm trying to think about the best way to do this, and it is not super clear at the moment, but we're going to go ahead and just keep working on it. So one of the things I can experiment with is adding in an exponent to the depth fade. So if we look at a location that has a good depth fade, that's a pretty good one, right? What we would really like to have happen is we would like the desaturation to occur in the middle of the fog distance. If we change the fog exponent, you can see how what happens is it basically just pushes the fog back. And if we lower the fog exponent, it comes forward. Lowering the fog exponent is actually not a bad idea, but we don't want to simply mask those deep shapes in fog color. What we would like to do is we want to preserve their value for longer than we preserve their color. So when we change their hue and their saturation, we want to change that first, and then we want the value to change last. Now what we actually do is we change the hue and the saturation immediately, and then it's our opacity that determines whether or not we see these values. So because we're using this opacity, the opacity is always going to be based on the total opacity of the fog. So what that means is that our opacity of the fog rating that we're using here has to be whatever is further away, and that would be the hue and saturation changes. So the hue and saturation changes need to be in sync with this value. And the value, did I get that backwards? If I want to preserve the value for longer, then the value needs to be what changes based on distance. So right now what we're doing is we're changing the value based on the fog. And basically what we need to do is change the value based on the fog adjusted. So we're going to try adjusting it with just a power. Whoa, that didn't work. Power, there we are. And we're just going to go ahead and set up this power with an arbitrary exponent of art choice. Devaluation exponent. Set that up with a 2. But here's the issue. That's clamped between 0 and 1, and what we really need is a value that is beyond 0 and 1. So what we really need is to recalculate the same things we did before, but with different ranges. And that's really what the original did. So now that we have the desaturation value changed a little bit, that's obviously much too bright, but that's not too bad. So the devaluation exponent should control how they look when they're in the fog. And you can see the idea here is actually working pretty well. You can see the mountains, the little cliffy things over there. You can see how clearly they show up against the backdrop, and that's exactly what we're aiming for. Same over here. This might be good enough. I might be okay with this. Now the only issue we've got is that the color it fades to is really a little bit strange. It doesn't work exactly the way you'd think. A big part of that is that the lighting is very low. So the super bright coloration that we've got feels a little bit off because the stone walls are not lit that brightly. There are a couple of options. I guess one of the first options we should try is just to turn up the sun. It's set at 0.46 right now. If we were to like bring it up to 0.74 or something simple like that, we might get enough brightness that would look more or less correct. I really don't know. I think that we need to do a little bit more tweaking here. So let's do a little more tweaking. If we take this fog perturb, the y distance, there it is, y-axis. Here it is, bottom of fog. Bring that up. So you can see that it crawls up as a pure opaque layer, and that's not really how I want it to look. I think I might just need to use another exponent on the fog perturb here too. So let's go ahead and put that in. No big deal. We'll just do that. So just punch that into the same comment field. And then here, this is our fade distance exponent. I think we can just use the same one for both. That would be my guess. So I'm hoping that will be just one, and I won't have two separate. No, you see how there's a 1 underneath. I actually don't remember how to do that, so we'll just do it this way. It's uglier, but that's fine. Now, taking the power first versus taking it after the max doesn't actually make very much difference. I might argue it doesn't make any difference at all, so let's go ahead and do it that way. Obviously, we still need to do some tweaking. So you can see that now it's retreated pretty deep into the hole. But what we really want to do is fill those corners with our fog. Now, obviously, that's impossible to do everywhere because it's not necessarily going to always be in the right spot. But if we were to push, ooh, that's too much. If we were to push this up to maybe 95, we can get a little bit of darkening. I don't know. This feels like it's too much fog. You know, I might just put a max cap on the depth fog. Because it's not really going to work for when there's holes. When there's holes in the ground, it's not supposed to just become opaque. That's not how I want it to be. So if we have a max distance, or a max fog value, then we should be able to raise the fog up and then simply set the max amount of value that we want out of it. So here's our max y-axis fog. It should have a slider. It doesn't for some reason. So here you can see at 0.5, for example, it sort of makes sense. It sort of works out. And what I really want to do don't know. It's a little bit tough. Let's go ahead and just play with it for a little while. Obviously, I knew ahead of time. I knew that I was going to have to supplement this. But what my problem is now is that the y-axis fog is fundamentally a different kind of fog. That's intended to be a particulate fog. in a very different way. So the desaturation is really hurting us. It makes the ground look gray. We only really want to desaturate based on camera depth. So here you can see we get the total fog and the devaluation exponent. We actually want to change this over to camera fog. This can still produce some issues. I'm not really sure the best approach here. I'm sort of working in the dark. But I don't want the ground to be gray all the time. It's still pretty gray. Why is it so gray? I guess because our opacity is high. So if you want to know what I'm talking about, this is what it looks like here. If I were to change the max fog value to 0, you can see it's supposed to be this color. What I'd like it for it to be is I'd like for it to be this color except a little bit of sand or something. I certainly don't want it to decolorize like that. That's wrong. Well, the camera only fog is already better than it was. But what I might want to do... See, this is the issue right there. You're looking at it. We do want to fill the ground. Why can't I see any fog yet? Ooh. It looks like the depth fog isn't doing jack shit. And that's because I changed this so that it was only going to be... yeah, so this is actually wrong. Let's try that again. We want to keep the devaluation. The value is the brightness. The saturation is the thing we need to lerp. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another lerp. Where we are going to push the saturation and the hue. I think it might be easier if we push the RGB instead. Sorry, I'm thinking about how to do this. And we're going to be getting the camera fade here. So what we've just done is we've said whatever the fog color is supposed to be, it should only be that color if the camera is far away. So hopefully what that means is that the ground won't turn, yeah, it won't turn gray. What I'd like to have happen is for the fog at depth to create some devaluation. It doesn't appear to be doing very much though, does it? Let's go ahead and play with some values. Sorry, I closed my window. I opened the blinds to do it, and now the sun is in my eyes. All right, so bottom of fog is at 80, which should be very, very visible. Max y-axis fog. Okay, so you can see that the max fog is not very... That is the max fog, according to this. It's not really very max, is it? So the question is, why isn't the depth fog doing the other half of the operation? So the values, you can see how in the very depths it looks like there's fog. That's because of the camera depth. We're moving away from the camera, and that's why we're seeing the fog there. But the actual result of just the depth fog doesn't appear to be very significant. I'm not getting a lot of opacity from it. Now what it should be doing is it should be reorienting the value, and the value should be darkening. But it should be darkening to a flat color. And I think that's actually what it's doing. It's just that a flat color value still has yellows and grays. But I don't know why it is. I mean, there's clearly still shadows that are very, very, very visible. If we change this y-axis fog to 0, no, here it is. You can see that what's happening is it's starting to lerp towards that color, but it is not getting there, despite the fact that this is set very, very, I mean, this is like, that is completely opaque. That should be completely opaque. Despite that fact, it is not doing anything. So I'm trying to think about what to do. I might think about it off screen for a little while. What I might want to do is go ahead and create the same setup I had before. Yeah, so let's go ahead and put it back the way it was. We'll just put the depth fog in the deep, and that's where it'll stay. And we'll use it for masking the holes in the ground, rather than for... Ooh, well, I told you it was opaque. There it is. It's opaque. Let's go ahead and drag this down. Bring this, we'll just take a look over here until we can see some depth elements, and we'll set it up properly. But what I might want to do is add in some other kinds of fog elements, because I need to have, you can see where we've got these weird dark pools. Those are just artifacts of me not having tweaked it yet, but where you can see those weird dark pools, I would like to have particulates. And I think I've just been planning to add them manually, and that might be what I have to do. So if we were to bring this from 90 down to like 85, and then this down to 60, what you can see here is this is sort of what I was looking for here, where it's only in the depths that we get the depth fog. Previously, I was using the camera depth fade for these, which means I had to have the camera depth fade really, really aggressive, which means you couldn't really see very far. So the fact that the camera depth fade is now separate from the y-axis depth fade means I can clear up some of that fog that we used to have. Downside is you can very clearly see that you're not in water, you're in empty space. So we need to add back in some of that fog anywhere there is a surface, and I don't really know how to do that. I kind of want to try adding in a particle system that spawns based on the terrain, like just using the terrain shader. Let's try it. The problem is that it's going to be spawning particles all over the place instead of just near where the player can see. Still, it's worth trying. So here is our terrain. If we add in a particle system, boom, we might be able to tell it to use the terrain as the target. But I don't know, because I don't really know whether or not that's a targetable shape. Cone, hemisphere, box. See, it could be a mesh renderer. I would hope it's a mesh renderer, but I'm not sure. Let's try. It's not. Okay. It's certainly not a skinned mesh renderer. That doesn't make any sense. I think it's its own thing. Yeah, so I can't do it like this. There are other ways to do it, though. I could use the terrain data and manually spawn in particles on the ground level. And that's probably what I'm going to have to do. I can't imagine trying to manually cloak the ground in particles. That just seems like a tremendous amount of work. But I do need particles on the ground. I need particles to hide the fact that this is all crisp. I need particles to soften the edges so that it feels a little bit more organic. And a big part of that is going to be spawning in particles on the terrain surface. But I don't want to spawn them in just in the terrain surface. I'd also like to spawn them in on top of rocks and whatever else. So what I'm thinking about doing is maybe I could do it using raycasting, just vertical rays. That seems like it might be a good idea. So what I would do is I would simply follow the player around, and in front of the player I would have this down raycast system that just creates more particles that are directly below where the player is. The problem is that as the player sweeps their eyes around, they're going to see these particles sort of fade into existence. There are ways around that. We'll go ahead and start with what we need first, though. So here's our player, and inside of our player, we're going to create another particle effect system here. And we're going to set the shape to a box. No, to a plane. Can we get a plane? Rectangle. Is the rectangle on the z-axis? It is. Good. Now we're not actually going to be using that shape for emissions. It's just going to be for us being able to tell what the heck's up. It's a strange pose you've defaulted to, but whatever. So if we drag this forward, we can then scale it up like, 30, 30, 30, whatever. And we'll end up with something that doesn't quite work because the particles are so large. This is why it's important to understand how large your particle system is going to be. The problem is I'm not sure whether or not the scale here is something I can access. We'll find out pretty soon here. So what we're going to end up doing is using this as a casting device and sort of casting straight down. There are other ways to do it, but this should work. I'm trying to think if there is a way to do it without me having to do any of the work. See, we could do a collision test here. We could test the collision out on the world and just make it collide with everything in the world. But what we really want to do is have that first particle not exist at all, so that when it collides, that's when the particle exists. And that's just not going to work this way. We're going to have to manually do it. I don't really want to, but it's not really any other option, unfortunately. So we'll just go ahead and set this to 0, and we'll set up a manual script. So call this a... I guess we do not have like a particle script. I say call it put particles on colliders. What an exquisite naming system I've got. 15 to 20 minutes once Unity decides to recompile. At some point, thank you, we will simply put the particles on the colliders on the collider, on the particles. Here we are. It's going to be another 15 or 20 minutes while this opens. Exciting. All right, so there's our put particles into colliders or whatever. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to need to find the particle system in question, but it should be one that we already have. So we're going to go ahead and create an accessor. Is it not called a particle system? Oh, we haven't actually finished booting yet. There we are. Just a little way for us to access the particle system. And then what we're going to want to do is be able to get the bounds that we are looking at. Let's go ahead and see whether or not we can even process that. So if we look at the particle system, here's our shape. There it is. If we take a look at the shape, we have this scale value. So what we're going to do is we're going to just debug log that. Public void test. Menu test. Just so that we can see whether or not that's what we actually need. Yeah, good. So that is the value that we're looking for. That'll tell us how large the emission shape that we created is. Obviously, 2 of those values are good, and 1 of those values is nothing because we're not actually caring about the depth of our shape. We're going to be firing from a plane. So now that we know we can get that shape, let's go ahead and create a gizmo. That should be on Draw Gizmos selected. There we are. So what we're going to want to do here is draw our own references so that we can tell what's going on. So this is going to be it's going to be us, but I can never remember whether it's world to local or local to world. I think it's world to local. And then we're going to draw a wire cube, and the wire cube is going to be a specific size. It's going to be vector 3.0, and the size is going to be, oh, that's not 0, there we are. And the size is going to be new vector 3. The scale that we're using flattened on one side, so ps.shape.scale.x, ps.shape.scale.y, and 1.1f. We need to set the color to gizmos.color equals color dot gray. Gizmos.matrix equals transform equals there we are. So now we should see a box drawn around our box. I don't see it. Make it bigger. Maybe I just can't see it because it's too close. No, it's supposed to be global, world to local, local to world. There we are. So now that we've got it, we can simply show a lot of rays casting straight down. This is only when it's selected, so it's okay if we're a little bit flabby. All we need to do is create a ray, and a raycast will happen. So let's go ahead and create those outside. Raycast hit. We go ahead and say ray equals, I'll go ahead and make it a new ray. Ray equals new ray. And then here we're going to say ray dot direction. It's always going to be the same direction. So ray dot direction equals transform dot forward. Notice how we're taking the identity out up here. That's on purpose. We're removing the matrix on purpose because all of this is happening in world space. So up here we just say ray dot origin, and this is going to be where we get the center point, which is transform dot position, plus, and then we need to put in a random value between -1 and 1 for each of these other axes and multiply that by the scale. So for that we're going to want to actually have the scale. Might as well store it up here. And then down here we can tighten this up just a touch. And then here we can say float x equals random.value. Actually, except we actually want random.range. Random dot mathf.random. Do I have to actually give it like a new random? I do, don't I? What a pain in the ass. All right. We'll go ahead and do that for now. Random r equals new random. This doesn't seem right. I think I'm forgetting something. I don't recall having to create a new random. This isn't it. What am I mistaking here? Oh well. We'll use this method. It's not ideal, but whatever. The problem here is that there's no range here, and there should be a range. Am I thinking of a PHP? Because I've been doing a lot of programming in another language. But here you can see we've got a next double. So we might as well get that, and we can multiply it by 2, and then we can subtract 1. And you can see how that doesn't work because it only gives us a double. It refuses to give us a float. For reasons unknown to me, C# treats that as a serious issue. It's not. I can't. This has to be wrong. I have to be doing something stupid here. I don't see anything else. I feel like I just forgot something very, very basic. All right, so there we go. That'll give us the origin, and then we can do a Raycast. So we just do a ray, out, hit cast. And I don't actually think we care about anything else. We'll give it a max distance just so that it doesn't take forever. Make it, say, 50. And if there's a ray hit, then we just draw a line between where we started and where we went. So gizmos.draw a line. Ray.origin and hit dot point. Yeah, see? That is what we're looking for. You can see how it's too big. It's twice the size it needs to be, so that's fine. All we need to do is divide by 2. We want to do that after. Oh, we just don't multiply by 2. That's all. There we go. And the other thing we want to do is we probably want to draw something a little bit more, interesting here, like that. Just so that we get an impression of it actually landing on the ground. Oh, that's not very big, but that's fine. So this is basically what we want to do in every frame during our active during our update cycle. So we're just going to do the same thing in update. pretty easy, right? Of course, we need to make sure we understand how many particles we want over time and stuff like that. Public float emission rate. Go ahead and set that to 100 for now, I guess. And then what we're going to do is keep track of our emission counter. And then in update, we'll say emission counter plus equals emission rate times time.delta time. And then we'll say while emission counter is greater than 0, or greater than 1, whatever, emission counter minus minus and emit. Public void emit. Easy enough, right? And guess what? It's this. I cannot possibly redefine random 85 times every single frame, so we're going to have to have like a global random, which is really dumb. This is not right. I think I'm forgetting something. There should be an easy random setup. I should just be able to ask Unity for a random number. I just don't remember. I'm blanking on how I do it. I don't know. Hold on, my mic is wobbling out of range of my head again. So here it is. Ray direction equals transform dot forward. Now what we need to do is remember, is it ray origin then direction? Yes. And it's barking because it doesn't like the order of operations. Don't really care. So here we're drawing a line and then drawing away our sphere. We obviously don't want to do that. Instead, we want to emit. So to have that random.range, says everybody. Random is not letting me pick random. It's like, oh, did you mean random.unity.mathematics? It's not letting me do anything in random. Sorry. This is why I don't know what's going on. The long-term support version of Unity, everybody. How great. So we're going to go ahead and put up a new particle down. So we can just say ps.emit. And then here you can see it's letting us do, there we are, emit params. So we need to set up some emit params in order to make this work. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Emit params, EP equals new emit params. And this should involve things like position, and position is really the only one we care about. That should work. Why is it not working? Oh, and count. There we are. So that should be all we need to do. The only issue is that it's really expensive, because it does a raycast for every particle. But, you know, we'll figure some stuff out. We can always cheat a little bit later if we decide we're going to cheat. So for now, we'll just go ahead and hit play. It shouldn't look like anything because all the particles should be emitting from... No, where's the particles? Hold on. We'll just go ahead and give them a speed of 0 so they don't like do whatever they're supposed to be doing here. Where's all the dang particles? Okay, so it's definitely trying to emit the particles. Oh, they're up there. Oh, they're in local space. Okay, that's no biggie. We can take them out of local space in a jiffy. So, boom, perfect. There we go. So now you can see that what we've got is a system that kind of just spreads particles on the ground. Obviously, these particles are nowhere similar to what we need just yet, but you can see that the idea is fine. All we really need to do is polish what these particles look like and how they spawn in. So first things first, we don't need to say plink. That's just unnecessarily slowing things down. The second thing is we would like to set this up with a whole bunch of different values because it's currently really quite silly. We definitely don't want to use the default particles for this. Let's go ahead and use some different. Let's just go ahead and use late sand for now, and we'll figure out exactly what we might want later. With the late sand particles, I believe that that's all going to be fine, but let's go ahead and extend the lifetime of this, and then we'll add in a start color that is a little bit more our tone, and then we will set up some color over lifetime values with some alpha. There we go. And I believe that since we're using the late sand, it needs to have, I think it needs to have some values. Let's take a quick little look. Stable random. Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and do the custom vert streams and add in the stable randoms. I don't see him. So they're definitely there. I think the problem is they might just be too small to see. No, there's something wrong. Oh, see that? Over there in the corner? Yeah, there we are. So we are getting a little bit. The fade in is really, really slow. So the point here is the idea here is that the particles we're seeing should be very, very neutral, and we shouldn't really pick up on them being their own thing. One of the issues is that we're going to see these particles on sand and on rocks and all sorts of things. So I guess the first thing we're going to have to do is change the start color to something, that's darker but has a very low opacity. And then the opacity value that we've got here, we're going to make that pop in much, much faster. It's also a bit large at the moment, so we're going to bring that down to maybe 2. And we're going to try and we want to offset. So if we offset it, then what we'll do here is we'll say hit dot point plus vector3 dot up times offset. What did I call it? I didn't call it offset. I called it move up. We'll call it offset. Ob says, what are the particles for? The way that the ground looks is too pristine. I need the particles to add in some level of fog and life. Then I can't do it using depth fog with any method I know of. So we're going to do it using particles. The only question is whether or not I can find some values for these particles. That seems like a good match. Right now, for example, you can't even see them because they are small and their alpha value is so low. Let's keep adjusting things until we find some values we like. We are probably going to need a new particle shader for this that does something a little bit different. One of the things you might notice is that these particles sort of fade in and out as the camera moves. That's because these particles are late particles that are affected by camera range, which means that we're probably going to have to change to a different material that's specific for this setup. But it does lead to some solutions, I can already tell. So we're going to take these, what is it, late sand we're using? Yeah, we're going to take this late sand, going to duplicate it. We're going to call it general ground cover. Now if we add that general ground cover to here, someone is now using a drill, either in the basement or next door, I don't know which. This place is getting harder and harder to survive. It's just louder and louder every week. Here's our general ground cover. And basically what we're going to want to do is move it further away. Now it's going to take a little bit of time for them to start coming in, but you can start to see the discolorations, those dark values. What we would really like to do is, instead of them simply being darker, they would ideally be something that breaks up the outline. I just don't know about how to do it. Yeah, black is not working out for us. Let's just try a mid-tone gray for now. And I think we're going to go ahead and give it a random rotation. That's 306. That's 360. We want it to be hard to see. We want it to be an effect that you can feel, but you can't really see. But the problem is that our terrain comes in many different colors. So as you are wandering around and the particles start to fill in, they need to be something that will work on every color. The problem is the thing that they are trying to work on, the thing they're trying to extend, is not the thing they're in front of. So Ob says you could get the color of the texture at the Raycast hit. That would be very difficult. I mean, not hugely difficult, but it would require me to do a material splatting test on the terrain. I guess I could do it. But here's the thing I was sort of thinking. I wonder whether or not we can make this an early material instead of a late material and have it print to the depth buffer. I guess probably not. That would be a little strange. I just don't think this isn't going to work as is. I need to think about it some more, try and figure out what I actually want it to do. Right now it's just introducing weird fluff that really doesn't work for us. I might just go back to using manual particle cover. The manual particle cover is quite easy. It's nothing terribly onerous, so it might be the best bet. Let's go ahead and put down some manual particle cover and see how it looks. Here we are in room 2. It's already got a particle effects section. Here it is. And we can just drop in some prefabs that we've already built for this purpose. So here's our silt cloud, which might be what we want. Yeah, it is. So if we drop the silt cloud in here, you can see what we've got is a flat little plane of particles. I'm not sure that their color will work. That's the only issue I've got. The other issue here is that if we scale the object, it doesn't actually work. We need to scale the shape, which is something I don't like, but that's fine. We can do that. It's not a big deal. I think that's in my basement. They are hammering the hell out of something so loudly that it is actively making my floor shake. One of the issues is that you can't actually see the height that these are at because the renderer doesn't properly display whether the blue line is above or in front of or behind a mesh. So if we just add that in there and we hit play, you should be able to tell that there is a lot more going on there. Problem is it's not free. So we would have to make sure to turn them on and turn them off at the same times, at the right times. It should be right here. Did I screw it up? I don't see any signs that there's any real silt here. Is it too low? Now this is using a late transparency, which is the same as the rest. So we shouldn't see the fuck? It's supposed to be right here, right? Am I hallucinating? What's going on? It might just be that they're too faint to see. That would be weird. Why would my prefab be set up wrong? My guess is that I changed the material, how the material works, and I never actually looked into it. There's clearly some gunk in this particle effect that I've got to solve if I want to use it. Oh, so there's some. All right, so the late transparency is actually doing the opposite of what I needed to do. That's no big deal. That's just the settings being bad. So first off, yeah, okay, that's fine. It's not pink. This is probably the issue. We want it to be like 50. And we're going to want to just bring the color down a touch. It's a little too bright when it's like that color there. I think that we need to have the renderer pass customized vertex streams in. Not 100% sure on that, but I think we need to. If we want to get that vertex color going. We'll have to do some thinking about that. I still can't see the particles until I get real close. See that? So the idea here is that the particles should be something that you can see at certain ranges. We want them to fade out when you get super close, because then it'd be kind of obvious that they're particles. Yeah, so that's probably a little bit more in terms of what I want it to look like. It's not correct yet, though. It's just very, very primitive. I guess I changed things. I never saved the values because the idea here is that this is supposed to look like ground cover, and right now it doesn't look like anything. So let's go ahead and tweak it until it looks more or less right. Let's pop up this late transparency. Here's our late transparency shader. It does take in the vertex color. That was my concern. Yeah, that should be all we need to have it do. Should work fine. The other thing it does is it does some world normal nonsense, but I don't think we have to worry about that right now. So we want this to have a little bit of variety and motion, just a touch. So we're going to make it so that it starts, the random rotation is fine. We're going to want to give it a rotation over lifetime. There it is. And that should have some. The lifetime isn't that long, so I'm not sure why we weren't seeing very much. Let's go ahead and save this. Now what I might do is switch this out for a particle bladder, which we'll talk about a little bit here. So this is kind of what I had in mind, to soften it a little bit. But the problem I've got is that I really need to soften it in the edges here, not on the straightaways. And I'm not really sure how to go about doing that. I think I'm going to need to do a custom setup. So I want particles basically in the edges here, not in the middle. We'll have some particles in the middle sometimes, but if I want the particles in the middle, I'm going to want them to be pretty dense. Because it's supposed to be like a fog. If I put the particles off to the corners, then I can use fewer particles and do a better job of it. Yeah, so this setup isn't going to work because it's obviously square. What I might do is create a particle splatter, the sort of thing that you see over here that I'm using for foliage, this thing. I might use one of these, create a particle splatter brush that is like an ink, that I can like pour it into an area. Instead of, just splatting arbitrarily. I don't really know what algorithm I want to use for that, though. I'm going to have to think about it. However, I have been streaming for a while. My voice is going. So I'm going to stop here. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll pay attention and chat for a couple more seconds. But until Wednesday, that's the next day. See you later. There's my stop button.